What's up everybody? Welcome to Balkan Moto. It's been a while since I've posted a video, and this year has been kind of a bit of a wash in terms of having the time to do some content creation as well as ride the bike and work on the bike. So now that the riding season is over, I've found myself with a little bit of spare time, and this is where you find me today in my 3D software, Blender. Today, I figured I would start a new project that is gonna go for the thing that's been taking up all my time this year, which is my son. So for his first birthday, I figured I'd build him a balance bike. Because it's never too early to get started with riding a motorcycle. The idea I got from Lawless Bikes, which is a company that used to exist, that made wooden balance bikes for toddlers that were in the shape of cafe racers and such, which was actually super cool. And initially, I was going to buy one of their bikes. But it just turned out that earlier this year they closed down for business, so now there wasn't really an alternative option. So I decided I'll take it upon myself and build one of these bikes. So the design that I kind of chose to go after is, again, a cafe racer of sorts, just because it seems like for a balance bike, a cruiser wouldn't work too well. Something a little bit more sporty, where the riding position is a little bit more leaned forward, would tend to work better. So I went with the cafe racer, designed after the popular Honda CX500 platform. And this is what that basic shape ended up looking like. So we have 13-inch wheels, some 2x4 frame, a tank made out of a bunch of pieces of 2x4, and then a bunch of dowels running through the whole frame to make the foot pegs and the handlebars. Then I started to look more into this and started to buy some parts and model them more realistically. So I started to build the more higher quality model. So in this episode, we're going to do the start of a new series of this balance bike build, and this first episode is the initial part of the design process. I have the rough design, and we're gonna hide that and actually focus on the high level design. So the first thing that I did was I bought some Wheelbarrow wheels and ended up modeling those. So for those, I can show you, they end up looking like, wait, hide this and this, so Wi-Fi design. So that's what the wheels look like. Now these are actually modeled to scale, and they already came with bearings installed in them, and the holes were 1/2 inch. Now these were meant for some heavy-duty wheelbarrows, and the axles for these were a little bit expensive. So instead, what I did was I bought some bushings that convert the 1/2 inch down to 5/8. Sorry, not 5/8, 3/8. Yeah, pretty sure 3/8. And so that reduced the size of the axle needed. And I bought some axles, which are literally just rods that are that same size. And the same was done with the front wheel as well. So that's what the wheels look like. In terms of what they actually look like, the rims are black, the tires are looking like So the bushings that I got were they're copper or bronze, I'm not sure. And then we have the rods for the center. And that's actually what the grip on them looks like. So they're pretty beefy, but that's kind of what I was going for. So before we get into colors and stuff, let's continue on with the rest of the stuff that I built. So then looking at the frame, there was definitely a need for a top piece as well as kind of a vertical frame support. And if we look at the CX500, its frame kind of resembles this shape very much so. So these are just 2x4s that are cut to this shape. So the back is kind of cut at a 30-degree angle and the front is rounded off a bit. This piece here is again a 2x4 that will be screwed in with some framing screws to the top part and I believe that's a 3/4 of an inch hole for the dowel that will ultimately become the foot peg is drilled into it. As for the neck, we have another 2x4 that's cut at a 60-degree angle, such that the fork angle then becomes a 30 degrees. And there's a 1/2 inch size hole at the top that will become the neck, the mounting point for the axle for the forks. And you can see that these holes are actually depressed a little bit at the top as well as at the bottom. And the reason for that is that there's going to be bearings that we're going to install in there to make the steering a little bit smoother. So that's really what the base of the frame is just 3 pieces of 2x4. Then the next part is the engine mounts. So looking at the left engine mount first, it's made of 2 pieces of 1/2 inch thick plywood. And that the first piece would look like this, which again lines up with the hole for the foot peg, and has 2 additional holes here and here that would actually become the mounting plates to attach the motor on. And the other piece kind of is identical to it, but it has this additional part at the back with this arced hole part as part of it. This arced hole will function as the place where the swing arm will mount, and the foot peg will also go through the swing arm. So we're going to mount it that way. And again, once these 2 plates are cut to shape, there will be screwed into the vertical piece with some framing screws, so they're not removable at all. Then in terms of mounting, we have the engine bolts. We're going to use M8 60mm bolts, which are about this big, with washers on both ends and a nut, and same for the top hole. So that's kind of like what the mounting on this side would look. The other side is essentially identical, so we have this kind of shape that's taking place here. Then there is another mount on here, which is the top engine mount, which consists of essentially 3 pieces. There's 2 plywood pieces on either side, and then this is a 2x4 piece that's been cut down to size to fit like such, and then the kind of the same, in this case a 70mm length M8 bolt with washers and a nut to be placed there. So that's the engine mounts. Now getting into the swing arms, this is where I kind of went a little bit different from my rough design. And the swing arm now kind of looks like this. So it's a 2x4 piece that's been rounded and cut down a bit in size. So it's not exactly 3.5 inches wide. I think it's just 5 centimeters wide. It has the hole for the main foot peg, a mounting hole that lines up with the bracket on the frame. These two holes are for the bracket that's going to hold the rear shock. And then there's two holes at the end that kind of hover over the axle. These are actually meant to function with the axle bracket, which looks like this. So that axle bracket essentially hugs the axle and stops it from sliding out and provides holes for mounting. And again, we're going to use the M8 70mm with washers and nuts to connect everything together. So once connected, we have this bolt here, the two at the back to connect the axle, so the wheel is attached, and then these two remaining for the other side. So before we dive into that, we can reveal the other swing arm. So that's kind of how the bike ends up looking. At this point, might as well put in the foot peg, which is just a dowel that's I think 3/4 of an inch running across the whole thing. Once installed, I think in order for it to not slide out, what I might do is I might put some cotter pins on either side, so it kind of blocks it from sliding out, or just put a screw down the middle to kind of mount it in place. In either case, that's kind of how the swing arm looks. Now, for the next part is essentially the rear shock. And of course, this bike is way too small, and it's not going to actually have real suspension, but rather just mimicked suspension made out of wood. So to mount that, there are two mounts. One at the top that's part of the frame, which, similar to the engine mount at the front, would look much like this. So two pieces of plywood with a small block of 2x4 in between, with a M8 70mm bolt running in between with washers and a nut. And then at the bottom mount, this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. And just to make things a little bit easier to see, I'm going to hide the left swing arm to show you the entire assembly. So that assembly consists of a piece of plywood on the inner and outer side, and a piece of 2x4 in the middle. The outer piece has two holes on it for the bolts that will mount it against the swing arm, like you see on the right side here. And the middle piece just has a bolt running through it that will essentially allow us to attach the Moto shock that I've designed to fit between the frame and this swing arm bracket. So once we have everything together, we have the swing arm, the bracket at the back, and this is kind of how things are looking. And in terms of that rear monoshock, we have a shape like this, which is a 2x2 piece of plywood wood that's been just shaved down to this shape, and it's going to be painted to kind of make it look like a spring shock on the back. So that kind of covers the back of the bike. Now for the front, we have the forks. The forks essentially break down into three components: the triple trees, and then the forks on either side. And to begin with the triple tree, we have the top yoke, bottom yoke, and then some additional componentry. And before we go into the yokes, like I said, there's going to be a bearing that's going to show up in either side. So here we have that first bearing kind of being inserted. These bearings have a 1/2 inch interior diameter and are, I believe, I forgot what their outer diameter is, but they're from Amazon. So a bearing on the bottom, bearing on the top. Of course, there's going to be a bolt axle that's just going to run through the whole thing. Then with that, we're going to have the bottom and the top yoke. So the top yoke would look like this. So a piece of 2x4 that's been drilled with a hole for a bearing at the top, and has these little dowel holes on either side. And I'll show you what those are for. But essentially there's that bearing that fits on the top, at which point we can put a top washer here. So that's kind of how it completes the assembly at the top. And there are two dowels that are 5/8 that kind of will get mounted into it and glued and screwed so they can't be pulled out. So that kind of becomes a top yoke. And the bottom yoke is very much a similar idea, where we have a block that's been drilled with the holes for the dowels on either side. Again, a bearing gets inserted, and at this point we have a washer at the bottom and two nuts kind of on top of each other like that, holding the whole assembly together. And then we have the two dowels in there as well. So that's kind of what the triple tree ends up looking like. Then we have the forks, and the forks begin with the side of the fork itself. So the fork, if we hide the triple tree stuff for a second, the piece of the fork starts with as a 2x4 that then gets cut down to this general shape. A hole at the top gets drilled for what ends up being a dowel that serves as the handlebar. There are holes going across this way that will be the mounting bolts. And then there are two big holes here and here that kind of crisscross with the bolt holes on the other side. These two essentially get put on top of the dowels from the triple tree. So as you can see, these dowels, essentially the fork gets inserted onto them. Then we have the bolts going in, top and bottom, that essentially lock the fork to the triple tree. Each of these comes with washers and nuts, essentially completing the assembly like this. Then at the bottom, we have, similar to the way that the back was, a axle bracket with 70mm M8 bolts with washers going in and nuts on there to hold the whole thing together to the wheel, to hold the wheel to the forks. So that's what the fork ends up being like. And then once we have the other one, that's kind of how the whole thing looks. And finally, we put the handlebar dowel in place. There will be some handlebar grips that I'm going to get for these and use that as a starting shape for the frame. The motor is going to be kind of the next thing. The other piece that I have also designed is the tank. So the tank is a very simple thing, which is quite literally going to look like this. And as you can see, it's essentially 9 pieces of plywood across, cut to shape, with one small piece of plywood on top to serve as the mimicking cap. And if we hide the frame, just so you can see, the pieces of plywood are actually cut to shape like this to fit on top of the frame nicely. And I'll probably end up having some sort of bracket here, or maybe down here on either side, and one at the back to hold it to the frame so that it doesn't go anywhere. But that's the tank. So really that's kind of how the bike ends up looking like without the motor and the seat and a light. This is kind of where I can show you what this would look like with some color on it. And that's kind of what I was imagining for it at this point. And this is kind of where we're going to drop it off at this time. In the next episode, we're going to take a look at how we're going to do the headlight, how that's going to mount to the triple trees, as well as maybe begin with some of the design on the motor. The colors of this are obviously not finalized. I do think I will be using a black frame. The forks, haven't decided yet whether or not they're going to be gold or red. And same with the tank. For now it's red, but it could be some other color. So this is just kind of to get a sense of what the bike would look like. And we still need to figure out the seat. The seat, again, will begin with probably some sort of piece of wood to serve as the kind of base for it, and then I'll build a leather seat around it that will become the final product. So either way, this is it for now. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe, hit the little bell for notifications when your videos become available. Check me out on Instagram at BalkanMoto2018, and check out BalkanMoto.com. As this series progresses further, I will actually begin building the real life bike. And at the end, I will release the full plans for how to build this yourself, or should you want to, I could build one for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.